I did it, Mom. I shared your recipes with everyone. All it took was a bit of interdimensional travel. Location, location, location. A menu for the multiverse. Chapter 1. The Last Order. The smell of cilantro and lime used to feel like a hug from my mother. Now, it just felt like a debt I couldn't pay. I stood behind the counter of El Rinconcito, my knuckles white as I gripped a damp rag. It was 8 p.m. on a Tuesday in Lower Manhattan, and the only sound in the restaurant was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant, mocking honk of a taxi. My tiny diner was a jewel box of Peruvian flavors, vibrant turquoise walls, hand-woven tapestries from Cusco, and the rich, earthy scent of ají amarillo simmering in the back. But it was a jewel box, hidden at the bottom of a dark ocean. Location, 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 I whispered, echoing the mantra from my Business 101 textbook. I was 22, a full-time student at NYU, and a full-time failure as a restaurateur. My mother had died a year ago, leaving me her recipes and a small inheritance that I had foolishly poured into this lease. I wanted to feed the world her lomo saltado. I wanted to see people's eyes light up at the first bite of ceviche. Instead, I was studying supply chain management by the light of a closed sign I was tempted to flip permanently. The bell above the door chimed. My heart did a pathetic little hop. We're actually about to... I started, but the words died in my throat. A man stepped inside, looking like he'd just walked off a high-fashion shoot in Tokyo. He wore a layered charcoal overcoat, a silk scarf, and an effortless air of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. But it was the creature in his arms that truly stole the light. It was a cat. A sleek, midnight black cat wearing a tiny, perfectly tied white silk bow tie. When the cat looked at me, I gasped. One eye was a piercing electric blue. The other was a warm, molten amber. "Karina Vega," the man said, his voice a smooth baritone that tasted like expensive chocolate. "You look exactly like your mother's favorite photo of you." "Takashi?" I breathed. "Takashi Agawa." We had been inseparable as children when his father was a diplomat in Lima. While I had stayed behind to study spreadsheets and stir pots, Takashi had disappeared into the digital ether. He was a nomad influencer now, with 10 million followers who watched him drink tea in Kyoto and hike the Swiss Alps. "In the flesh," he said, offering a dimpled smile. He set the black cat down on the counter. "And this is Kuro, my manager and travel agent." I couldn't help it. I reached out, my fingers trembling. The cat, Kuro, didn't flinch. He leaned into my touch, his fur feeling like spun silk. I scooped him up, tucking his warm, solid weight against my chest. "A manager in a bow tie? Takashi, you're still as ridiculous as ever." "Kuro is earnest about his commissions," Takashi joked, pulling out a stool. I laughed, a genuine sound that felt rusty in my chest. For a moment, the stress of the mounting bills faded. I went into the kitchen and prepared a plate of causa rellena, chilled mashed potato terrine infused with lime and yellow chili, layered with avocado and tuna. I watched Takashi eat. As a travel influencer, he'd eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants globally, but he closed his eyes as he tasted the causa. "It's her recipe," he whispered. "It's perfect, Karina." Then, he looked around at the empty tables. The silence of the restaurant felt heavier now that it had been acknowledged. "Business is quiet," I admitted, leaning my elbows on the counter. Kuro sat between us, his heterochromatic eyes watching me with an intelligence that felt unsettlingly human. "I'm losing the lease next month, Takashi. I have the best food in the city and no one to eat it." Takashi didn't offer pity. Instead, he looked at Kuro. The cat let out a sharp, melodic meow and tapped Takashi's arm with a velvet paw. "Ah," Takashi said, nodding. "Kuro thinks it's a waste. He wants to help." "Help? Is he going to post a reel for me?" "Better," Takashi said, his expression turning strangely solemn. "Tomorrow morning, Kuro will come to your door. He'll bring a package. Hang it over the entrance. Don't ask how it works. Don't overthink it. Just cook. Kuro will handle the location problem." "Takashi, I'm a business student. I don't believe in magic. Then believe in results. Takashi stood, placing a $100 bill on the counter for a $20 meal. Wake up early, Karina. Your life is about to get very busy. Chapter 2. The Bronze Entrance. I didn't sleep. I stayed up scrubbing the floors and polishing the silverware, fueled by a mixture of caffeine and a desperate, illogical hope. At 6 a.m., a soft scratching sounded at the door. I opened it to find Kuro sitting on the sidewalk. In his mouth, he held a set of chimes. They weren't made of metal, but of a dark, weathered wood that seemed to hum with its own internal frequency. "Good morning, manager," I whispered. Kuro trotted inside, leaped onto the doorframe with impossible grace, and dropped the chimes onto a hook I hadn't noticed before. He looked at me, then tapped the wood with his paw. Clack-thrum! The sound wasn't a chime. It was a ripple. The air in the diner shimmered like a heat haze. My ears popped. I felt a sudden sharp scent of salt, roasted meat, and old stone. "Kuro?" I asked, my hand on the door handle. The cat meowed, a commanding sound. I pushed the door open. I didn't see the gray pavement of Manhattan. I didn't see the trash cans or the Starbucks across the street. I saw a sun-drenched plaza made of gleaming white marble. Huge fluted columns rose into a sky so blue it looked painted. Men in flowing white tunics and women with braided hair and stolas walked past, their sandals clicking on the stone. The air was hot and smelled of the Mediterranean. I fell back, hitting the counter. "What? Where?" A man stopped in front of my door. He was older, with a regal bearing and a purple stripe on his toga that suggested immense wealth and power. He looked at the sign above my door, El Rinconcito, and then at me. "A new taberna?" he asked. His voice was deep, and to my shock, I understood him perfectly, though his lips seemed to be moving to a rhythm that wasn't English or Spanish. "And what is this scent? It is not garum. It is sharp, fresh." Kuro trotted to the entrance and let out a welcoming chirp. "Please," I stammered, my survival instincts kicking in. "Enter. Welcome to my taberna." The man, a Roman senator named Marcus, sat at a small table. He looked at the turquoise walls with curiosity. Strange decor. From the east? "Further west," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Would you like to try the ceviche? It is fresh fish cured in the juice of citrus fruits, with chilies and onions." "Fish without fire. Barbaric," he remarked, though he looked intrigued. I rushed to the kitchen, my hands moved on autopilot. I sliced the fresh sea bass, marinated it in lime juice, thankfully I had a fresh shipment, and added the red onions and cilantro. I served it with a side of camote, sweet potato, to balance the acidity. Marcus took a bite. The silence in the diner was absolute. Then his eyes widened. He took another bite, then a third. His movements hurried. "By the gods," he breathed. This Leche de Tigre. It wakes the soul. It is like the cold spray of the sea mixed with the fire of Vulcan." He stood up, walked to the door, and shouted to the crowd in the plaza. "Friends, forget the greasy sausages of the Forum. Come and taste the nectar of the gods." Within 20 minutes, every seat in my tiny diner was filled with Romans. I worked like a woman possessed. I made lomo saltado, the smoke from the wok swirling into the ancient air. I served chicha morada, the purple corn drink. The Romans went wild for it, thinking it was a rare, non-alcoholic wine from a conquered land. They didn't have dollars. They paid in gold coins, ore, and silver denarii. By the time the sun began to set over the marble horizon, my cash drawer was overflowing with precious metal. Kuro sat on the counter, cleaning his paw with an air of smug satisfaction. When the last customer left, I stepped outside onto the marble steps. I looked at the vast, sprawling city of Rome. For a moment, I felt like the queen of the world. Then, Kuro tapped the chimes again. Clack-thrum! I blinked. I was looking at a dark Manhattan street. The smells of Rome were gone, replaced by the scent of rain on asphalt. I collapsed into a chair, staring at the pile of gold on my counter. I wasn't a failing student anymore. I was the chef of the empire. Chapter 3: The Emerald Canopy. The next morning, I was ready. I had spent the night researching Roman history, but Kuro had other plans. When I opened the door after he tapped the chimes, I wasn't met with marble. I was met with green. A lush, vibrant forest stretched out before me. The trees were the size of skyscrapers, their leaves glowing with a faint bioluminescent light. The air was cool and tasted like pine and magic. "Not Rome today?" I asked Kuro. The cat stretched and walked out onto a porch that now overlooked a village built into the giant branches of the trees. A group of tall, slender figures approached. They were ethereal, with pointed ears and eyes the color of moss. Elves. "Greetings, traveler," the lead elf said. Her voice sounded like wind chimes. "We smelled something sweet. Something we have never encountered in the Great Wood." I looked at my prep station. I had been planning to make more meat dishes, but looking at the serene, nature-loving elves, I pivoted. "I am making picarones," I said. "They are squash and sweet potato donuts, fried until crispy and drenched in a syrup made from raw cane sugar, cinnamon, and cloves." I set up a portable fryer near the door. The smell of the spiced syrup, the chankaka, wafted out into the forest. The elves were hesitant at first. They didn't eat meat, and they were wary of heavy oils. But the picarones were light, airy, and the syrup was divine. "It is like eating a cloud dipped in sunlight," one young elf whispered, her eyes shimmering. They didn't have gold. They paid in emeralds the size of my thumb and vials of moon dew, which, according to my quick Google search, which somehow still worked in the diner, was a highly sought-after ingredient in high-end cosmetics. By noon, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I was learning to read the market before the customers even spoke. I was adapting my mother's recipes to the souls of the people, or beings, in front of me. In the afternoon, a group of elven elders came in. They were more somber. "Our groves are dry this season," the elder said. "The joy in your food. It provides a sustenance that our roots cannot find." I realized then that this wasn't just about money or business. It was about what my mother always said: food is the bridge between hearts. I served them solterito, a refreshing chopped salad with fava beans, corn, olives, and fresh cheese. They wept at the taste of the beans. As the sun set, turning the forest into a sea of violet and gold, Kuro signaled the end of the shift. Back in Manhattan, I sat on the floor of the diner, surrounded by gold coins, glowing emeralds, and vials of magical dew. I looked at the photo of my mother on the wall. "Mom," I whispered, "I think we're going to need a bigger pantry." Chapter 4: The Chrome Future. The third day was the hardest. The door opened to a world of gray steel and neon blue. There was no sky, only a ceiling of massive pipes and flickering screens. People moved in a blur, dressed in skin-tight silver jumpsuits. They didn't walk. They glided on moving walkways. I stepped out and nearly choked. The air tasted metallic. A woman stopped, her eyes tracking a holographic display in front of her face. She looked at me, her expression one of utter confusion. "Biological matter?" she asked. "Are you a museum exhibit?" "I'm a chef," I said, standing tall. "I serve real food, made by hand." A crowd gathered. They stared at my kitchen as if I were performing alchemy. I learned that in this world, year 3050, food was a series of beige pastes designed for maximum efficiency. Taste was considered a legacy distraction. "Try this," I said, holding out a small bowl of lomo saltado. The stir-fried beef, the onions, the tomatoes, and the crispy fries, all tossed in a savory soy vinegar sauce. It was the ultimate comfort food, bold, salty, and bursting with life. The woman took a tentative bite. She froze. Her holographic display flickered and died as she lost focus on her work. A single tear tracked through the silver dust on her cheek. "I can feel my tongue," she whispered. "I can feel my heart. It's hot. It's alive." The news spread through their neural links instantly. Within minutes, a line of efficient citizens stretched down the chrome corridor. They didn't have gold or gems. They paid in credits, which manifested as a digital transfer to a sleek black card Kuro had produced from his bow tie. I didn't know the exchange rate, but the numbers on the card had countless zeros. I watched them eat. They didn't just eat, they experienced. They sat in my turquoise booths and touched the woven tapestries, marveling at the sensation of wool. For a few minutes, they weren't cogs in a machine. They were humans again. That night, back in the quiet of New York, I realized my business degree was finally making sense. I wasn't just selling food, I was selling contrast. In Rome, I sold the exotic. In the forest, I sold joy. In the future, I sold humanity. I looked at Kuro. He was batting a gold denarius across the floor. "You're a genius, aren't you?" I asked. Kuro just winked at me with his blue eye. Chapter 5. The Victorian Tea. A month passed in a whirlwind of dimensions. My routine was set. 5 a.m. prep, 7 a.m. shift change, 6 p.m. closing, and 7 p.m. to midnight studying. My grades were soaring. When my professors elaborated on market penetration, I thought about the time I sold Anticucho's grilled beef heart skewers to a colony of dwarven miners who lived in a volcanic cavern. They needed high-protein portable food that could stand up to the heat of the forge. My skewers were a disruptive innovation in their subterranean economy. Today, the door opened to a foggy London street. The cobblestones were slick with rain, and horse-drawn carriages rattled past. It was the Victorian era. Casa, I decided. But we'll make it elegant. I prepared the casa rellena with precision, using delicate molds to create perfect towers of yellow potato and avocado. I topped them with a single perfectly boiled quail egg and a dot of black olive batija cream. The customers were repressed, stiff-collared gentlemen and ladies in corsets. They entered with suspicion, whispering about the American taberna that had appeared overnight. "It is quite colorful," a duchess remarked, peering at her plate through a lorgnette. "It is a traditional Peruvian delicacy, Your Grace," I said, using my best formal tone. Light, sophisticated, and perfect for a lady's palate. She took a bite, her stiff posture relaxed by a fraction of an inch. "Oh my, it is rather zingy, isn't it? Refreshing. Much better than that dreadful boiled mutton." By the end of the day, I had a pile of silver pocket watches and silk ribbons. But more importantly, I had a realization. I was becoming a master of the pivot. In business, the pivot is everything. You have to be able to change your strategy without losing your core identity. My core was my mother's recipes. The strategy was how I presented them. I was no longer the girl afraid of an empty restaurant. I was a woman who could feed any world, any time, any soul. I was Karina Vega, the interdimensional restaurateur. And I was just getting started. Chapter 6. The Logistics of Magic. By the 6-month mark, my life had become a masterclass in chaotic efficiency. My NYU classmates were stressed about internships at mid-level marketing firms, while I was literally balancing the books of 3 different civilizations before my 10 a.m. lecture. "Karina, you look rested," my friend Emily said, peering at me during our global economics seminar. "And is that a new necklace?" I touched the teardrop-shaped sapphire at my throat, a gift from a cloud giant who had found my seco de cordero cilantro lamb stew to be the only thing that could satisfy his gargantuan appetite. "Just a vintage find." I lied smoothly. I had become excellent at lying. I had to. "How do you explain to the IRS that your income for the quarter includes 3 kilos of Martian spice salt, 12 Roman coins, and a bag of sun seeds that actually glowed in the dark?" I had spent my credits from the future world to hire a specialized, discreet accounting firm that specialized in high-net-worth, unconventional assets. It was Kuro, of course, who found them for me. One clack sound of his chime and I was on their doorstep. They didn't ask questions about the emeralds. They just converted them into a trust fund that ensured El Rinconcito would never have to worry about rent again. But the real change was in my head. Every morning, Kuro would tap the chimes, and I would have exactly 3 minutes to look out the door and read the room. One Tuesday, it was a high fantasy tavern in the middle of a blizzard. The patrons were weary adventurers with frozen beards and notched swords. Target market, high calorie, warming, soul-healing comfort. The menu, sopa a la minuta, a hearty beef soup with milk, angel hair pasta, and a fried egg. I sold out in an hour. The next day, it was a floating island of sentient avian beings who lived on light and music. Target market. Sensory-driven, ethereal, non-tangible satisfaction. The menu. I experimented with infused steam, using the aromatics of arroz con leche, rice pudding with heavy cinnamon and orange peel, served in delicate glass flutes they could inhale. The result. They traded me songs that, when played in the diner back in Manhattan, made the plants grow 3 inches in a night. I was learning that business wasn't just about selling a product. It was about solving a problem the customer didn't even know they had until they walked through my door. Chapter 7. The Manager's Fee. Kuro had become more than a manager. He was my silent partner. Late at night, after the door had clicked back to the familiar hum of New York, Kuro would sit on the edge of my bed while I studied. He seemed particularly interested in my negotiation tactics textbook. Whenever I reached a section on value-based pricing, he would let out a soft purr. I started talking to him. Actually talking. "You know, Kuro," I said one night, scratching that perfect spot behind his ears. "I used to think my mom was crazy for keeping this place. I thought she was a dreamer who didn't understand the real world. But looking at these other worlds, I think she was the only one who saw it clearly." Kuro looked at me, his blue and amber eyes reflecting the soft glow of my laptop. He reached out a paw and tapped a photo of my mother on my desk. "Yeah," I whispered. "She would have loved you. She always said a black cat was a sign that the universe was about to whisper a secret. The secret was this: success isn't about being in the right place. It's about becoming the place people need to be." Chapter 8. The Return of the Nomad. The year mark arrived on a crisp autumn evening. Manhattan was painted in hues of gold and copper, mirroring the Roman plaza I had visited that morning. I was closing up, wiping down the turquoise counter that had seen everything from robotic oil spills to elven nectar. I was taller now, my shoulders held back with a confidence that wasn't there 12 months ago. I was at the top of my class. My thesis on cross-dimensional market adaptation, thinly veiled as a study on emerging markets, having won a departmental award. The bell chimed. I didn't need to look up to know the scent of expensive sandalwood and sea salt. Takashi stood in the doorway. He looked tired. The effortless glow of the nomad influencer had faded, replaced by a weary sort of wisdom. He looked at the diner, at the vibrant plants, the polished gold accents, and the atmosphere of quiet, undeniable success. "You stayed," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I did more than stay, Takashi. I thrived." He walked to the counter. Kuro didn't leap into his arms. Instead, the cat stayed sitting next to me, his tail wrapped firmly around my wrist. "Kuro seems to have made his choice," Takashi noted, a hint of a smile touching his lips. He looked around. I saw the news, or rather, I heard the whispers. In certain circles, they talk about a ghost diner in Manhattan that serves the best food in any reality. My followers keep asking me for the coordinates, but I tell them it's the one place I can't map. "I've handled the situation," I said, sliding a plate of lomo saltado toward him. "I don't need the location anymore, Takashi. The customers find me, regardless of which street I'm on." Takashi took a bite of the beef. He closed his eyes, and for a second, he looked like the boy I'd known in Lima. "I'm done, Karina," he said suddenly. "The traveling, the influence, it's empty. I've spent 10 years going everywhere and being nowhere." I've seen the stars from the edge of the galaxy and the deep-sea vents of the Atlantic, and all I wanted was a seat at this counter. My heart gave a familiar hop, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. Kuro told me the establishment was improved, Takashi continued, looking at the cat. But he also told me that the chef is lonely. I looked at Kuro. The cat looked away, suddenly genuinely interested in a stray crumb. He's a very observant manager, I said. He has a condition for his continued services, Takashi said, leaning forward. He wants to stay, permanently. He thinks this location has the most growth potential. And what about you? I asked, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. I'm a traveler by trade, Takashi said. I know how to handle logistics. I know how to talk to people. I know how to tell a story. You have the heart and the heat, Karina. But even a queen of dimensions needs a front-of-house manager. I looked at the gold coins in my safe, the emeralds in my pocket, and the business degree on my wall. Then I looked at the boy who had brought magic to my door when I had nothing left to lose. I reached across the counter and took his hand. His skin was warm, real, and grounded in the here and now. The kitchen is mine, I said firmly. I don't mind if a dragon walks through that door or a prime minister. My mother's recipes are the law. Takashi laughed, and the sound filled the diner, making the wooden chimes above the door hum in harmony. Understood, chef. Then welcome to El Rinconcito, I said, smiling as I picked up Kuro. We have plenty of worlds to feed. Epilogue. The Universal Menu. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, but inside the diner, the air was shimmering with the scent of Peruvian spices and infinite possibility. Takashi was behind the counter, expertly adjusting the grind of the coffee beans while filming a teaser for our new Global Fusion series, the only influencer content that would ever be shot here. Kuro sat on his shoulder, the white bow tie replaced with a tiny gold medallion. I stood at the door, my hand on the handle. I looked at the wooden chimes. Where to today, manager? I asked. Kuro tapped the chime. Clack thrum. I smelled ozone. I smelled ancient parchment. I smelled the distant, sweet scent of a world that hadn't been invented yet. I opened the door, and I didn't look back. I had everything I needed right here. My mother's legacy, a partner who finally understood the value of home, and a cat who knew that the best location in the world was wherever you chose to stand. I smiled at the first customer, a giant with 3 eyes and a famished expression, and held out a menu. Welcome, I said. Would you like to try the ceviche?
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.